All right. Kevin, why should people listen to this episode of Pod Friends?
I think it'll be interesting. We talk about listening, what you get out of listening, which I don't think people talk about a lot because usually you listen. I don't know if you listen about talking, you talk about listening. You're going to find, exactly, you're going to find some new hobbies. I think I make a recommendation for a couple of things you can do.
Ooh,
And then
tease.
also, I talk a little bit about how I've approached decision making in my life, and maybe that'll be helpful to you if you've got some big or small decisions coming up.
Look at that. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Friends. I'm caffeinated. I'm excited. I'm Matt Scott, your host. You could find me on social media, Twitter, especially at Matt Scott GW. And today I'm really thrilled to come to you with another phenomenal guest. I'm loving this season and having a lot of fun doing this season of Pod Friends, by the way. And I think a huge part of that is that last year, a year ago, I started Pod Friends and started having a ton of great conversations with Taryn Armstrong, with Mari Forth, my co-host on the Wrestling RHAP, of course, with Brooklyn Zed, where we talked so much about pronouns and being non-binary and lots of really powerful conversations. And at that time, as I had those first few episodes in that first season, which capped off with Wendell Holland, I was just figuring out what Pod Friends was and also figuring out my footing as a host on Rob as a podcast. And, more than anything, I think a lot of you could relate to this idea of just not knowing how solid the ground that you're standing on is, or, maybe having those doubts and not believing in yourself and just not really knowing again. And I'm so thankful for last year and all of the conversations I could have with Pod Friends, not only because they dovetail really well into all of these conversations for this season, but because, like everyone who I interview, I'm on a journey myself. And I have had some people who've said, Matt, you should interview yourself on Pod Friends or be interviewed on Pod Friends. I have a list of people who have volunteered to interview me. And we'll get there one day. I don't think anytime too soon, but we'll get there one day. But I say that to say that, I'm on the journey. Our guests are on the journey. And I think most importantly, Yes, you. I love the fact that you just looked at your listening device to make sure that it didn't break. I like to leave people hanging a little bit like that. I'm sorry. So you are on a journey also, and I hope that as this conversation goes along, as with all of them, that you could really think and reflect and see where you are in the journey. And if this one resonates with you, with today's guest, Kevin Jacobs, that you go back and you listen to last week's with Jessica Leese, the one from the week before with Evie Jagoda, the one from the week before that with Mike Bloom, the one before that with Marian O'Ketch, and that you subscribe to the podcast. Wherever you're listening, hit that subscribe button. It matters. It keeps the lights on. I always say it. I'm not going to beg. I don't want to beg. I feel like I'm begging, but robhasawebsite.com/podfriendsfeed. If you believe in me, if you believe in what we're doing, if you want this thing to keep going, that is one of the ways. Subscribing is one of the ways to really make sure of it. And, leave a review, leave the 5 stars, and just let me know what you think. Again, Matt Scott GW is where you can find me. So those are all the plugs. I want to dive right in to telling you about this conversation from today's episode with Kevin Jacobs. So, Kevin is someone who's really phenomenal and fascinating. And I open up this conversation maybe in the most awkward way, but, admitting to him for the first time, despite the fact that we'd been in touch a little bit over Twitter DMs over the last half year or so, to let him know that I am not a viewer of Big Brother Canada. Now, don't drag me. I know you're all yelling at your podcast, Matt. You're so effing dumb. You should be watching Big Brother Canada. It's better than Big Brother US. It's awesome. I know. I understand, and I will catch up at some point, just like I'll catch up on a bunch of other shows. But I think what was cool was that I spent so much time, like a solid 10 hours at least, watching videos of him playing the game, listening to podcasts, including his 5-hour podcast with Taryn, and just really diving into who Kevin is to inform this conversation. And I'm really proud of the conversation we had, which dives into Kevin's Big Brother Canada experience up top and how his perspective has evolved over the course of the last almost year since being on the show. We talk about Kevin as the character versus Kevin as the human and what are the similarities and differences. And we really do get into who he is, from his parents moving from South Africa to Canada, from his passion for writing, to his desire to get more creative and just improve on himself, from his pivot to from being a sales engineer to really focusing on doing really good things for the world and kids in particular. We talk about what a sales engineer is. I needed some help with that one. And we really dove into so much more, like his relationship with this Rob is a Podcast community, because he goes way back with Rob is a Podcast. We talk about fellow podcaster, former Pod Friends guest Chantel Francis, who was quote unquote home invaded by Kevin's friends the night that Kevin won. Long story, we get into it. And again, just a plug to check out Chantel's episode, which you can find in the Pod Friends feed. Lots of shout outs, by the way, over the course of this episode for a lot of professors and great people who influenced Kevin's life. And we talk about the idea of, is he a villain? I don't know. I think things are a lot more complicated than that, but you'll listen in and you'll hear about that. What else? I think, we really go into a lot of places here, but one of them is like talking about just a shared fear of death that we have. And we also really talked a good amount about Pod Friends, which, as I say in the episode, made me uncomfortable. Like, if you people want me to talk about Pod Friends, let me know and I'll talk about it more. I want to make sure that it's always about the guests as much as possible, but we did get into that a bit because Kevin was asking, and I hope that that all resonates with you and you appreciate that too. So much here, but if there's one thing I could kind of leave you with before diving in, it's this realization that Kevin and I had along the way, that the world's full of really complex, dynamic people and personalities and perspectives and backgrounds. And sometimes we don't take time to appreciate that. And so it's so important that we really read between the lines. And Kevin's a great example of that, not only in Big Brother Canada, but in general. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest. Making his way to the podcast, hailing from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, an Aquarius, a sales engineer, a son, and the champ of Big Brother Canada 10, where he showed he's proficient in reading between the lines, and you can be too. Please welcome the strategist, the sweet winter baby, the king cobra, the fiance to Jillian, the one, the only, KTJ, Kevin Ted Jacobs.
We're live. I didn't even realize you hit it.
We're live now. I just hit the
cool.
record.
Okay, great.
And I record the intro and everything after, which I don't like to be too self-referential, so I feel like this part, now I'm in my head too much. Like if this part's in the podcast or if it's not in the podcast. So now I'm having an existential crisis.
Well, that's a you decision. And what's interesting about that is, like, this is often, I actually find sometimes the before and after of the podcast to be quite interesting.
It's usually, I feel like it's usually better from the, not even better, but just like more like, oh, okay. Like you're not like trying to filter out the thing that you like don't want to say because you're like, I don't know if I want to say that. Slash, like there's probably something in the back of my mind that's like completely unrelated that I'm like, why would I bring this up on a Big Brother podcast? So I will say this may or may not be the podcast right now. And for some reason, after like a year of recording these, now I'm in my head about it. I don't know.
I
Do you
do
have
that
that
to people
effect on? Yeah, I was gonna
sometimes.
say, do you have that
Yeah.
effect on people? People getting in their heads?
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes without trying, it can happen.
Look, I will say this: that normally I start out these podcasts. Sometimes it makes air, and I'm just like, look, I'm nervous. I have to say, I'm not nervous, but mostly because I'm picking up on your nervous vibes and your
Yeah,
nervous energy right now.
yeah. So I'm nervous for this one for a couple of reasons,
Do
and
it.
I'll say first off, I love Pod Friends.
Oh,
I really, really, really enjoy listening to Pod Friends because I'm curious about people.
mm-hmm.
And, if I've listened to somebody podcast about something for a few hours, I actually want to know what is that person? Like
Yeah,
what's their life? And for even more behind the scenes, one of those people was Chantel Francis,
yeah.
and she did a Pod Friends episode, and that's how I discovered Pod Friends in the last few months because I was like, I want to hear that. Like, what's her deal? Because
Yeah.
we were coincidentally neighbors, so that's how I got into it.
I have to say, like, and we won't even touch on that topic of, the home invasion that you facilitated on Chantel, essentially, like
Yeah,
indirectly, but
yeah,
you really are the reason that she was home invaded. Everything was okay. Chantel's fine. She's doing well. I think we probably talked about it in the Pod Friends episode, maybe at
you
some
did,
point,
you
but
did, you did.
look, I don't know. Do you have any shout outs for Chantel or anything like that?
I mean, that was a great episode. I'm excited. I think the point is I'm excited to be here. I've listened to some awesome Pod Friends episodes, and I'm a little bit nervous on my end because I'm used to arriving to a podcast, having,
Yes.
I did a casual watch of that episode to talk
Hmm.
about it. I did a more strategic watch. I took my notes. I went over them. I at least did my prep work so that if things go south, I'm okay there. Here, it's kind of hard to do any. Like I thought of, I don't know. I thought about myself a little bit.
Oh my god, I do enjoy I'm not sure if it's like seeing you frazzled or frazzling you through the process, but
Uh,
look, I've been thinking a lot about this and I've been doing my prep. I
cool.
have to admit something to you, which I don't know if this is the best way to start the podcast. I don't watch Big Brother Canada. I
Uh,
don't watch Big Brother Canada. I've watched a little bit of it here and there. I am very much a Big Brother person, but I'm not a Big Brother Canada watcher. To get ready for this podcast, Kevin, I spent way too much time watching you through this. I think I went through about 10 hours of content essentially. Some on
wow.
2x speed, but I went through everything. I said I'm going to dive in and I'm going to commit myself to thoroughly understanding this human on the other end because I already had my understanding, but I said I need to actually dedicate myself to watching. And I watched at least a 3 to 4 hour supercut of you playing the game, which I think helped out a lot. On top of all of the exit interviews that I could find with Cody and Derek and Taryn, and again with Taryn and all the other things. So
I'm
I was
flattered.
nervous to tell you that. I'm sorry.
It's such an interesting thing for me when someone's like, I'm talking to somebody or somebody who I knew from before the show, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
watch it," and they expect me to be really upset. It's totally okay. It's
Oh,
totally okay. It's
you're
oh,
not
you're
leaving right
missing out.
now.
You're missing
You're
out.
not
It's a
leaving
great
now.
show. I'm
I
gonna get out of here. I'm gonna hang out. We're gonna finish
Oh
this.
wow! I thought I was being
Yeah.
left hanging here, and then this would be the new shortest Pod Friends episode ever
Uh,
since the Marianne episode, which is about I went by my math 12 times longer than this. So hopefully you'll
I'm
hang
not a
in there
math
and
guy.
stay with me. But I
No,
mean,
I'm here.
look, I know Big Brother Canada is amazing, and I feel like actually it's a good place to start talking about that because there's so
Okay.
much within your story to dive into. But I know how amazing Big Brother Canada is. I felt the pressure to watch every year, especially since becoming an RHAP podcaster. I've also taken those few months of the year to protect my peace, especially because Big Brother US just like really just knocks you all over the place a lot of the time in terms of the coverage and following along and the live feeds and everything else. But one thing that I think is so fascinating with you in terms of like the fandom and how you're perceived, but also your game, is that there was very much like I don't know if it's the character and the gamer and the personality or the persona, and then there's the person. And look, Pod Friends, as you know, is about pulling things back in the person. But I don't know how to ask you this question and getting too meta, but I am curious, like, you've had time to breathe since everything happened with Big Brother Canada and your big win. And I guess I kind of wonder, like, how do you delineate the character and the gamer from the person? Or do you? Are they the same? Or I don't know. That's the big question on my mind, because you are such a strong character for folks who did watch you on BBCan. But maybe just to ask that question a different way, like, how would you define the character of Kevin Jacobs versus the person of Kevin Jacobs?
So it's the same person.
Mm-hmm.
However, that person who did that thing on Big Brother Canada was me at that moment in time in that space. So I had one of my favorite professors ever. His name was Larry Garber, and he had this little writing workshop. Shout out Larry.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that he was talking about exam scores once, and he said, your exam score is not a reflection of who you are, but it is a reflection of your performance at a certain moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like that way of viewing things. So if you put me in an ultra competitive scenario where I don't know anyone and I'm playing like it's my last time,
Right.
That's me. I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to do what I think is going to be enjoyable in that moment. I'm going to have my fun in the diary room, but it's also just a slice of me. I was pretending to be a different person for the first few weeks. So it's a part of me. It's not all of me. Put me in that situation, in that house. Yes, that's me. Is it who I am? It's a small, tiny sliver. Did that?
Yeah. And I mean, like, a follow up to that though, like, how you outside of yourself, or like in retrospect, for those who haven't watched your season of BBCan, like, how would you sum yourself up? I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I also recognize that there's a lot that you shared of like how you want to go into the game. There's a lot of retrospectives in terms of after the season, but looking back now, like, what's that character if you had to sum it up for someone who's not as familiar?
Yeah, I talked a lot of trash going into the house. If you have 2 minutes, you could go watch my bio. It's ridiculous, but it's also me talking my trash. I went in, I did what I said I was gonna do. I pretended to be barely a fan, to have not seen the show, and I was a big fan. Like I was in the RHAP community before all of this. More of a lurker than a contributor in any way. And then I went in and caused chaos, and somehow it worked out. I had fun doing it. And the reason was because I figured this was a once in a lifetime opportunity. If I did this thing, whether I was first out the door, which was a very real possibility for me, and I knew that going in, whether I was first out the door or whether I ended up on top, I would enjoy every second away from taxes and bills and real work, and away from responsibilities and appointments. Like, you're just in there doing this thing 24/7. So I enjoyed it. So
yeah, and I love that. I think like the thing that again, I've been overwhelmed by listening to your book. Like, literally there was one point this week where you messaged me and I was like, oh my gosh, does he know that I'm literally just consuming content of him? But like, not to creep you out or anything like that, but I guess that's what Pod Friends is. I'm just like, look, I've been spending way too much time thinking about you over the last few weeks, especially. But I think
it's nice that you did your research.
I know
that's a lot nicer than just showing up and being like, hey,
I have to say, and I mean, I think that like my goal is to really like understand the person that I'm talking with, or like
Mm.
to dive deeper. And as an interviewer, I've always just prided myself on like diving in and consuming as much as possible, whether it's like existing interviews, whether it's you and T-Bird going at it alongside Akiva and Rob on RHAP, like all that, even though I listened to that when it came out a couple months ago. Like I think that there's it's always interesting thinking of these shows, and I feel like a theme that's persisted in this season of Pod Friends is just there's there's a lot of pressure on folks, especially when you have the spotlight on you. And there's pressure in terms of like playing a game itself. There's pressure in terms of feedback and how you're perceived. Um, but you know, since we're here, I mean, I didn't expect this to be so much of a BB Can podcast from the beginning, but I am curious, like looking back on your experience, do you still look at things the same way as when you kind of won and left the house and finished your retrospectives, or do you have anything like any new perspective that you found since then?
Tons.
I'm curious. I'm curious, and I think the cool thing is like we'll I'm sure we'll be able to connect a lot of it with like life otherwise.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am curious what some of those things are. Plus, like just consider me a space to vent about anything and everything that nobody is asking about, or maybe that everyone's asking about.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the further I get from it, the more my perspective changes on
Mm,
things. I really, really, really do appreciate the experience. I feel incredibly lucky. I mean, you see, a promo is posted for BB
yeah,
Can 11, and you can see in the comments people being like, "Oh no, I didn't make it this year. Like this isn't the year I did it." Just to be selected to
yeah,
step foot in that experience, I think I maybe took a little bit for granted going into it. I mean, I still enjoyed every day, but
yeah.
thinking back now about what that was, I really appreciate it. Now, I'm actually enjoying and this is maybe a terrible thing to say while I'm on
That's
Pod
fine.
Friends. I'm enjoying the privacy. Like I enjoy not being on
Yeah,
camera 24/7 for a third of my year. That's a lot, like you said, of pressure. And
yeah.
right now, I think I appreciate a quiet day of work where I'm just right here, just hustling. I think I appreciate that more than I ever have.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's kind of the beautiful thing, and it's again strange that there's kind of this theme of perception. Well, I guess perception versus reality, or like outside looking in with different folks. Like Marianne, as like the
Hmm.
first podcast of this season, had her own kind of perspective, had her own like story to share. Mike Bloom had
Yeah.
so much to share that's beyond people see, and so on and so forth. But I guess like one question I have for you, just in regard to all of this, like, is there anything beyond the obvious, or at least beyond what you think people know? Is there anything that you're like, people outside looking in do not realize this about the experience that I just went through?
As it relates to the Big Brother Canada experience specifically, I think the one thing which has been said before is that even if everything goes right, it's not, you got to find happiness and love for yourself within, because
Yeah.
becoming, a good player of a specific game or something like that. Some people have this idea, and I used to hear people on RHAP podcasts being like,
Hmm.
you get that thing, and then what? This is
Yeah.
something I dreamed about for years, and accomplishing it felt amazing. But it's also, that's not the thing that's gonna like make your life. That's not the thing that's gonna make you happy. And happiness is
Hmm.
something you gotta find. It's yeah, that's the thing I'd say. I'd also say like in the Big Brother Canada community, a lot of people have been really kind to me.
Yeah.
Past house guests and others just reaching out or saying hello or making time, because that's not always easy to bridge when you're like watching these people on TV and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, Kev, you need anything? Or are you okay? Like that's a really interesting sort of jump.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting just hearing you talk about that too, where the I'm excited to get to really dive into who you are and where you are in your journey. There's so much that we could talk about. I don't have a script for my Pod Friends episodes. I just have a bunch of things that I'm curious about. But one of the things that really jumped out to me in spending more and more time with you as a character before, because obviously, like, in terms of Big Brother Canada as it happened, I would follow along in terms of social media and even some of the podcasts, listening to my fellow podcasters and hearing about you as this, like, oh my gosh, can he do it? Is it happening? What is happening? This is so improbable. What's going on? And I think that the thing that jumps out to me most is like, you are an like amazing, a kind, a nice person. And then when I go back and I'm like diving into the character, I'm like, man, how's it like how is this Kevin? Like, you're Kevin who even behind the scenes like has reached out and be like, Matt, thank you for Pod Friends. I listened to this episode. I listened to that one. You're amazing. But I guess like the thing I wonder about, because you did mention that this is you under the pressure of the hot lights on camera, 24/7 for however many days. But I guess I wonder, like, do people know that you're not an a-hole or you're not a villain? I don't think you're a villain, but I don't know what your perspective is on that.
Well, why are you selling me out right now?
I'm just saying, I'm putting it out there. Like, look, I'll call you. We could edit this out. We could edit this out. Don't worry.
I think a couple things work for me. So one, I do a lot of work on myself. That's very flattering what you just said. I'm like almost in tears already. I don't know why. But no, like that's just really, really nice to hear, because it's for me. I also played the game to play it. Like I didn't have ulterior motives, which is totally fine. Like if someone's in it to achieve something else or go on a different show or make money, like those are fine, go for it. For me, I just was playing a game I loved. And in that, I could completely compartmentalize a lot of empathetic parts of me and put them away and just play it for those reasons. But also I tried to never make things personal. And then on the outside, the difference is, and this is one of the reasons why I love Big Brother, why I love Survivor, why I have a weird relationship with The Challenge. I love shows that are zero sum, meaning there are a bunch of people competing and the only way to win is to win at everyone else's detriment. The person who wins these, there's one winner, everyone else loses from number 2 to number 16.
Yeah.
Now, outside of this controlled social experiment environment, it's actually not a zero-sum game.
Right.
You can win. Other podcasts can win. I can win. And I think generally being nice and helping people out in the long run helps, because there is not a finite amount of like success in the world or a finite amount of kindness. There actually is an infinite amount. So if you can contribute, so this is now we're just jumping into the psyche here. I feel like if I can contribute to that, it's all good. And that's why, like, it's a lot less pressure living outside of that house, because I'm not succeeding at the detriment of someone else.
Yeah, and it's also interesting just because it, like, that mindset of going in and recognizing it's a game, interestingly enough, and again, like thinking of not just Big Brother, but any of these shows, there are people, and it's interesting because it's definitely evolving as we get more and more super fans and fans on the shows. But I think back to the people who would get really angry, or the characters I'll say on these different shows who get really angry when they realize someone is scheming and gaming and really putting it out there, which I think that, and you've talked about this in some of the exit interviews and the like, and I think others have also talked about this, where it just happened to be a group that really appreciates the fact that it is a game and it's not all personal. Like someone, and I was about to use the M word, manipulating, which I think is definitely part of a game.
I did that.
So exactly. But someone like manipulating and doing that, that's the game. And I think that it's cool that, you're able to appreciate what the game is, because I am also someone who is ultra competitive in the context of a game, but also outside of it. Like, it really resonates with me what you were saying about just like, it's not a zero-sum game. We could win, but also when it's game time, it's game time. And I actually think like one thing that's really cool from your perspective is that while you also appreciated the game, you managed to have fun while doing it. But I am kind of curious, like, if you have any tips for anyone who's like, whether they're going into an actual reality game or whether they're like me or some of the others who've played these fan-made games, or someone who's just picking up like Monopoly and about to dive into it. Like, I don't know, but how do you manage to have fun in such an intense environment, I guess, is the question.
You make the decision to do it in
Yeah.
advance, and
Yeah.
then things get filtered through that. So if someone who I love very much calls me a terrible person on TV,
Yeah.
that's which happened. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
to me, through my head, there's a moment of, oh, we're on a TV show. I just got called a terrible person. This is really this is kind of fun. Like, this is an enjoyable moment. It's probably gonna be in the show. Yeah, let me be present and be here, but also let me have that perspective that makes it a little bit easier to go through, because those intense moments will happen and you can sort of freak out. But if you just take it in and you've made that decision in advance, I'm going to enjoy this no matter what. Who cares if I'm not sleeping? Who cares if XYZ is hard? Then it's a lot easier to filter through that.
I feel like most people, and I know that you've talked about this in terms of being able to like control your emotions and just, you know, have some presence of where your emotions are going and how you're reacting goes. But I wonder, like, where does that come from? Because most of us, I feel like, just we get caught up so easily. I know that I could get there, but like, how do you manage to, I don't know, how do you manage to have a grasp of your emotions, and where does that even come from? Looking at sort of your backstory, have you pinpointed that?
Okay, so how to do it? I wouldn't recommend it. It's not a healthy thing to avoid emotions. One of the seriously, one of the things I'm working on is feeling emotions more in themselves in the moment. So I am someone who is able to filter things and have a secondary response. Let's say, let's just say I'm feeling sadness. I have an ability to have that secondary response where visibly I don't look sad, but I can portray something else. That's not a healthy thing. It's actually healthy to embrace that emotion and to feel it in the moment, because your body, like, emotions are your body regulating itself. Like, those things, one of the things that I studied a lot before the house and just as a hobby is how the body, works with the brain. Emotions are important. Like, you should feel them. I don't recommend working on avoiding them by any means.
No. I guess like another question, and I as people could imagine, I'm definitely in that court and agree. But I guess I wonder, like, where, maybe it's a darker question in that sense than now that I mention it, but like, where does that come from? Is it because I feel like for a lot of people, maybe there's a natural thing in us that attempts to have that first layer as a defense mechanism. And I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to attempt to be one. But I guess I wonder from your perspective if, like, there's, I guess what I'm seeing and what I'm kind of hearing from you is like, there's this thing that's probably not great as a person to tap into, and yet you were able to turn this thing that's not great into something that worked for you in a context of a game. But I guess outside of that, in terms of who you are, I still wonder where that came from, if you have any clue.
Let's get Freudian here.
Please.
So I mean, I might have a couple of guesses. For one, I remember pretty distinctly, I got bullied a lot in like around grade 3 or so. Grade 2, 3, I just got in glasses. Like, you can imagine. I mean, just I mean, look at me. But it, like, I had these little like framed glasses, and I remember that point, and eventually, and that kind of forced me to
Mm-hmm.
learn certain social skills, whether it was like making people laugh or just learning how to listen or something like that as a young kid.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I haven't made this connection. I'm just surmising here. That might be it. It also might be my parents immigrated to Canada from South Africa,
Yeah.
largely because they wanted a better place to raise children. And I've always carried a guilt, which mom and dad, if you're listening to this, don't thank you. Thank you. This is not your fault, the guilt,
Right.
but I've also felt like a guilt, like that my problems maybe aren't as big as the ones that moving across the world might be. So let's just sort of put those in a small compartment and not listen to
Mm-hmm.
them. Um, you're very good. You're very
No,
good,
I'm
Matt.
not.
You're very good.
I'm not. I'm not. It's like, and it's funny because I feel like questions are just, and what I do is just giving people the space to like
Uh,
process. But there is a lot of processing that happens for all of us when we're just thinking out loud. Like I'm very much a verbal processor in that way, and it's funny because I realized really early on, like in high school at one point, like whoa, I'm figuring out so much about myself
uh,
just by talking with other people about it. And it's interesting kind of like hearing about, I mean, I guess I'm not surprised. Maybe I'm not surprised because like I've seen that before with people where it's like there's bullying and the impact that that could have. um I also will say I'm no longer a glasses person, but I was a glasses person at the age, and I literally would not wear my glasses at school like all that often. Like I would put them on, like be like, oh my god, don't make fun of me, like please, like just make sure no one's
scary
making fun,
moment.
just because there
Yeah.
that was such a thing. But I also think the other thing that's interesting is like you touched on your parents' story and what they went through, and um I am naturally curious, like was that, I guess I didn't assume, knowing that your parents like moved from South Africa
Mhm.
to Canada, that there was like a struggle with that necessarily, but was there anything that was like challenging about that from what you've known of that narrative?
Yeah. So a couple things. One, I'll also
Yeah.
just before getting into that, I'll point out that what I just did when I was talking about that was I got uncomfortable and then I said, "You're good, Matt." So that's also me on the note of just me trying to get better at the primary emotions. I got a little
Yeah.
uncomfortable. We're here to be vulnerable. I'm opening up. I got it. Let's
I will too.
let's sit in let's sit in let's sit in the uncomfortable and enjoy
We
it.
will.
Um, Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like they gave me an unbelievable life. Like I really didn't have any challenges as a kid. I think the biggest thing was just being in a different place from their families. Like
Hmm.
all four grandparents, I got to know as best I could across
Yeah.
because they were all they've all passed now, but they were
Yeah.
all in South Africa. Like always, they lived there. So I mean, their siblings were in different places. Actually, my mom's sister was here, which was nice. She followed. But I think the biggest thing was being away from family. And I mean, now I think it would be hard for me. I'm a 20-minute drive from where my parents are. Like
Yeah.
it would be hard for me to move across the world and not have that support. And I'm a 29-year-old adult man. So I think that's the
Yeah.
biggest part. I'm so appreciative of them doing that.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing more about that too, because it kind of it kind of touches on I don't know, I guess not only the point of pod friends, but like painting the picture of kind of who you are even beyond what other people might perceive. And it's, I guess, one thing that's interesting, or at least interesting to me, about like the conversations I get to have here is that no matter what, whether it's, that you're on a podcast and you talk about shows, or whether you're on a show, or whether you're a person in general, like there will always be the perception versus the reality. There will always be the things that people know and the things that people don't know or recognize in us. So I appreciate you sharing more of that. And I want to even just go back into, like, lay down on the pod friends couch, Kevin. I want to go
Oh
back
no.
into like growing up. I'm curious how you grew up and what that was like. I like to ask people like what they wanted to be growing up sometimes, but you know, I actually don't even know what I wanted to be growing up if I think back to that.
Yeah, I wanted to. Yeah, we can go here. I think I talked about it on Big Brother feed, so it's fine. My dad has diabetes. I really wanted to
Yeah.
cure. I really want to cure it, and then I just sucked at science. Turns out I'm not the one to cure that global chronic illness. But
Not too late. Not
that
too late.
was I think it's I'm that ain't gonna be me in this lifetime. I wanted to do that for a while. I wanted to be a comedian in high school, and then I found it. I did stand up a couple times. It went fine. I just found it to be the most lonely experience in the world because you win or lose alone. I would go to like an open mic, and there'd be 10 people in the audience, and maybe it was good, maybe it was bad. But then you're in the green room, and people are sort of on edge. I don't know. I didn't have a great experience with that, but that actually led me to one of my favorite hobbies, which is improv. Because improv, you win together, you lose together, and I love that. On the note of games that are zero sum versus not non-zero sum,
Yeah.
improv, at least at least there are two or more of you playing that game.
Yeah, I guess I wonder, like, how does that? Well, actually, before even asking about that, like, it's something I've always resonated with improv is just like that ability to handle what's thrown at you or what comes your way. And I do think that there is an element of like not even, well, I don't know. It's interesting because as someone who hasn't done improv in the improv team in front of a room since in the way that I'm sure that you have done, like, I think it's interesting because there's an element of like, okay, I need to, and Mike Bloom was talking about this recently too, but it's like I need to think A to C and not just A to B. But then there's also something I would imagine that's like, I'm not immediately reacting to the first thing that comes to mind, but I'm like building out this story. So there's like a quick wit that's needed, along with like an ability to be confident in whatever direction you're going in with improv. But I am curious, like, how does improv, or does improv show up for you in your life otherwise? I would imagine, because you mentioned loving it so much, but I'm curious what that's looked like.
Yeah, I mean, if you go into a scene in improv and you're like, "Oh, I'm this wizard and I'm doing this thing," you're gonna make the worst scene of all time. You're not gonna be, and that's like what and by the way, I'm not amazing at improv either, but like a real beginner's who go in and try and make a joke and be funny.
Yeah.
It's actually way more about listening to the person that you're doing it with, connecting with them, understanding where they're coming from, seeing everything as an offer. So something as simple as the way someone moves could be what you call an offer in improv. You can see up on the mic, an offer in improv.
Yes,
where
air quotes.
Yeah, where they're providing you something that you can build the scene on. So doing improv has made me a better listener. It's made me more empathetic. It's made me a better creative person because you can build stories and narratives that way. And it's also just a really, really fun thing to do. It's really enjoyable. It makes you open to the world. It makes you see everything around you as a kind of offer that you can build on. Yeah, it's a hobby that's like changed my life.
When did you start doing improv?
As soon as I turned 18, I signed up for the first level because that was the limit to get to being what they call level A at Second City in Toronto.
Yeah.
So, because I mean, Toronto was sort of the foundation for a lot of the initial SNL cast, like Gilda Radner and others came from the Second City, Toronto. Lorne Michaels back in the day was from Toronto. I don't know if he's been back since then, but they like, there is a really beautiful community of comedy here. So as soon as I turned 18, I was there doing it, and I've been back and forth throughout the years, but it's always been a hobby that I love.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I appreciate about improv, and it's funny because I feel like there are definitely some of my friends are not improv people. I also have some friends who are like very involved in the improv scene here in Washington, D.C., and like are on boards for the different improv organizations and are on multiple teams. So I am like more on the camp of appreciating that. But also recognizing that for none of it, like they all have a day job or something else that they're doing. So what was it that you were kind of tied up in? Like you had this improv life that was one of your realities, but adult life, I am curious to like understand more of your journey when it comes to just like what did you get up to beyond the improv fantasy, basically?
Yeah, so I actually, when I was deciding on what I would do after high school, I kind of knew I wanted to study English for my bachelor's, and
Mm-hmm.
there are two options. There's one to go to Western University, which is about 2 hours outside of Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
a school that doesn't like to be called a party school, but great education as well. And then a lot of my friends were going there as well. And then staying in Toronto, largely so that I could try and pursue this comedy thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I ended up deciding on the Western route, and I had an amazing time there. But I
Mm-hmm.
discovered a lot of other things that I enjoyed there. First of all, I hated business class, and my professor was a mentor of mine, and I just like the subject matter just wasn't for me.
What just to interrupt you and to
Yeah.
break this down a little,
Okay.
what kind of class, because I asked this as someone who
Yeah.
studied business, and I mean I only have an undergrad degree, a bachelor's degree, but it's I studied business administration,
Mhm.
and there were some classes I loved, and a lot of it that I was just like, why am I doing this degree? This is not for me. I'm literally not going to use these skills because it's painful, physically and mentally and emotionally painful to do a lot of what I did. But I'm curious, from your perspective, what was it that didn't resonate more specifically?
Okay. So part of my decision to go to this school was also that the business school there starts in the third year. So you could take
Mm-hmm.
like a business class in the first year and the second year. And I love, by the way,
Yeah.
my professor's one of the greatest professors in the world. Another one,
Mm.
Eric. Eric was an
Shout out to Eric.
amazing, sure. Eric was
Yes.
an amazing professor. Okay. I just, I didn't care about accounting principles. I didn't care about like a lot of these business schools are
Preach.
also they're very much participation's a big part of it. I don't like the whole show of, raising my hand just to raise my hand. At the
Right.
same time, I was convinced that I should take enriched English in first year, which sounded like a stupid idea because I mean, just thinking about the adjustment to university level courses, but
Yeah.
this course was so damn good, and it taught me things about the world and about humanity and about people. And these stories, like I didn't know literature could do this before that, and these stories were so enriching and so engaging to me that I said, I think doing this for the next, I don't care if like there are other degrees that will more clearly lead to
Mm-hmm.
money, but I think this will enrich my life and maybe make me a better person, and then maybe like we'll find a way to make money through it
Yeah.
otherwise. And I was like, I'm gonna try that, and I loved it.
Like, I feel like you need to, I was gonna say let me in on the magic, but and I also say this as someone who like, I attempted a creative writing minor at my university, and then I was literally like, do I take the class that I need that's required for my business degree, or do I take the one other class that I have to take for the creative writing minor? So I don't technically have a creative writing minor, but someone who's definitely immersed a bit in the English courses. Like, what was it for you that was so magical to paint the picture of like why this is captivating? Because there are a lot of people who are like, oh my God, Kevin, you don't love accounting and random things that you don't feel like you'll ever use. But then there are also people who are like, what? You like English? That's the thing. So I don't know. I'm curious, like for you, was there anything in particular that jumped out and resonated?
I didn't give fiction the credit that it deserved before I actually studied it as literature. My
Mm,
sister, growing up, was a much bigger reader than me. And I read a little bit,
yeah.
but she really, really read, and I didn't quite get it. And I remember those readings, I would do them, and I would understand in first year, and I would understand the like, sort of high level plot, a little bit of whatever it was trying to teach, and then I would go to class, and then as we're rolling out professors, Dr. Bentley would just
Shout out.
illuminate. Shout out DMR Bentley. He
Yes,
would just
DMR.
he would just he is one of Canada's greatest poetry critics, and he would just illuminate the space between the lines, and I would leave seeing the world. And if we go back to like why I like this podcast, it's about people, and by reading these totally fictional stories, I would understand people better.
Yeah. 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 I think there's also something like a connection that I'm making even just in hearing you talk about this, that again, one of the many things that I really I think I'm kind of grateful for how I've consumed the BB Canada show and your involvement, because something that I could appreciate even beyond it is like the ability to listen and to find value in what's between the lines, or the ability to listen and really appreciate that not everything is on the surface, or that like what someone's telling you, like maybe there's a lot that people don't process, I think I realize. And I wish that everyone would like dive in and ask the questions and want to know more. And I think the thing I appreciate about what you said with fiction is like, I now at this stage in my life am so much less. I just have a hard time like going and picking up a book at this point, just because of like the multitude of distractions and other things going on and all of the possibilities. But yeah, it's cool to see like the ways that you've kind of that you've adapted to, like, oh, let me dive deeper. Oh, there's something that's again, reading between the lines is the phrase that keeps coming up, but there's something that's between those lines that's there that maybe most people would overlook. But
Yeah, and it is hard. It's harder than ever to focus on anything. And
mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go on a rant, but it used to be that you'd go on YouTube, and every 3 minutes it would understand your behavior and make a recommendation based on that.
Yeah.
TikTok, every 15 seconds the algorithm
Mm-hmm.
gets better because you're swiping, and that's just exponential. Like, and that's the way a lot of the media we consume now is just attracting us, because better than ever at diving into that algorithmic echo chamber. I'm going to stop.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to stop there because
people are going to get angry. Like, oh my gosh, I'm watching this on YouTube because of a recommendation. How dare you? And honestly, if anyone gets this far into the podcast and they're like outraged and by that, then that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, your attention span's amazing if you're here.
Look, yeah, I mean, honestly, that's what it's all about. And I'm always so grateful to the people who like are there at the end. I like talking to them because like they're there and they're still here now, which I think is the cool thing. So thanks for being on that journey. This is getting way too meta again. But I think beyond kind of like that. So you mentioned like being really interested in English, and then I think that something that jumps out to me also just in like the journey is, you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had did you have a very different profession like before Big Brother Canada last year, and then did that switch? Or I'm curious to like learn more about that aspect of things. I ask so much about this, by the way, not because I'm all that interested in people's careers specifically, but because something I felt like in looking back at Big Brother Canada is like, so much is about how you'd play the game and not about who you are in like the cast bios and everything else. And so like, I don't know, I'm just like thirsty for knowledge, I guess, something like that, or insight into like what you were up to even before that, working wise.
Yeah, so after that, and university was, the English stuff was a really good creative time for me, because just the access that you have at a university, like a radio station or who knows, or a club or whatever, like it's unbelievable. Even like a nice gym, so after that I moved back to Toronto, and I was studying information, which is a very broad topic, but specifically the social science of artificial intelligence.
Oh my gosh.
And Yeah. So
Well, I feel like there's like I'm like wrapping my head around. I don't know if folks could hear the dial-up in my brain. That's like, wait a minute, could you could you break that? Explain that. Could you not to
yeah,
dive into that, but you said the social side of artificial intelligence.
yeah, I was looking at how humans interact with technology.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's also why something like a Big Brother was very interesting, under living under agreed surveillance for 70
Yeah.
days. So
Yeah.
while I was doing that, I was at a public speaking training company. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They help people with their public speaking, which is a really cool job because you can watch someone improve in one day from having trouble with public speaking to
Mm-hmm.
owning it.
Yeah.
One of the companies, they worked with a lot of tech companies, and that's how I eventually got into tech, where when I went on Big Brother, I was what's called a sales engineer.
Mm-hmm.
A sales engineer is a weird nexus of an engineer and a salesperson, and you're neither one.
So I'm glad you're admitting this, because I like when I realize in myself that when I hear the phrase engineer, my eyes like immediately gloss over. And I'm someone who I know a lot of engineers. I spent a lot of time talking with engineers about what they have done. Um, but yeah. So the sales engineer aspect of this is fascinating. What is a sales engineer? We know what it's not.
Okay, when you buy something today, you do your research.
Mm-hmm.
In 40 years ago, you would just show up to a store and they would hold all the information. You would go to a car dealership and the person selling you the car would have all the info. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if you go to a car dealership, you'll see computer monitors because they know people have done their research, and about 80% of, let's call it the buying journey. Let me go with air quotes again.
Yeah.
80% of the buying journey happens independently. Okay. Now,
Mm-hmm.
for me, in tech sales, it's rarely like, hey, come see this beautiful thing. It's more like project management, getting a lot of people involved. Sometimes these
Mm-hmm.
things can take 6 months or a year or 2 years to actually make a deal. And
Mm-hmm.
during that process, the salesperson needs someone who can speak the technical language while
Mm-hmm.
also help with the consultative sales side. And that's what a sales engineer does. They're almost like a jack of all trades who can do the people side and the tech side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm
Are you,
hanging in
did
there.
okay.
I'm hanging in there. I'm hanging in there. It took me. I was scared. I was worried that it would be a lot more complicated than it is, but I think it's really straightforward. Yeah, it's like and there are other phrases for that, but I feel like I've often heard like this is the technical project manager. This is like the technical uh, insert
Yeah.
job title that may or may not be sales here. But yeah, it's someone who
Yeah.
could like speak to both sides of it and break down the questions that, like, for instance, like I work in a climate change focused organization, but I'm not a scientist. So what that would be like someone who has the science, but then's also able to like do
Yes.
my job basically. So that makes
Yes.
sense. There we go.
Yes.
There we go. And all that was me cutting you off and talking about your journey and your career as a sales engineer. I don't know if I definitely cut you off at some point as you were talking through that.
We're having a good conversation. You can
Hey
cut me
man,
off a million times.
I can.
Yeah.
No one's ever given me permission for that on Pod Friends.
You've,
Everyone's usually angry with me and never wants to talk with me again after. It's so sad.
I know that's not true.
I know. That would be a weird alternate universe, though. But yeah.
No, I think this is a good place to just sort of, so yeah, I mean, I came back from the show and I went back to doing that, or
Mhm.
some version of it. And then I got a call basically saying, do you want to go help solve the digital engagement problem for providing virtual care to children on therapy?
Mhm.
I said it terribly. Do you want to help make digital therapy for kids better? And that's not a call I wanted to hang up on.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm up to now.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm curious what that looks like in contrast to your work as a sales engineer. But also I'm curious of like why that jumped out for you. I mean, most of us, I would hope, hear about working with kids and and supporting kids and would want to, but was there anything for you especially that, any reason why that jumped out, and that role jumped out?
So I often view life as a series of chapters. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I sounded like such an asshole. I often viewed life. I often view life as a series of intricate chapters.
Bigger.
I often view life as a series of chapters. So
Oh yes,
I don't
Kevin.
know. I haven't done improv in a while. So whether it's like university or Big Brother or my time with this amazing company I used to be at, right? And I was looking for the next one, and part of the reason why I like working in tech is that your typical tech role. I mean, it's a tough time right now. You can see the layoffs everywhere, but your typical tech role, around 4 years is a pretty long and good time to stay at a company. And the reason for that is because usually when you join a tech company, you get like maybe some options or something like that. 4 years is the typical vesting period. Anyway, I was ready to open a new chapter. And after the show, there are a lot of opportunities that came up. And this was one that was very almost altruistic. Like, it was a good cause. Not necessarily that's something that I need in my work, but it was a good cause. It was a big swing, and also just a really cool project. Now, where my expertise pass over are I do sales and marketing. The old company I used to work at was focused on marketing technology. And because I was a sales engineer, I know that top to bottom. And on the sales side, I'm a good listener. Let's call it that. So that's what I'm bringing over. And we're trying to build this thing from the top down. And what it looks like is that it's very hard to give virtual therapy to a child today.
Yeah.
Like, that's hard for a therapist. So we're fixing that.
Yeah. And it's cool. It's cool to like hear what you're working on and working toward with that. I mean, especially like in today's world, like, I mean, so much, I was gonna say so much more is virtual, but it feels like in the last 3 years of the pandemic, especially, there's been like this struggle of how do we support kids through their various virtual experiences. And actually 3 to 4 years ago, I was working on a project in my old job where I was basically, it was very focused on kids and digital well-being. So how they interact with screens, which that project actually continues to this day going into the pandemic. And that became a whole other set of considerations to think about when thinking of kids and how they interact with screens and technology. But figuring out how to use technology and like virtual therapy to the benefit of kids is really interesting. Cause like I mean, I'm sure there's a wide range of kids at different levels, but I think of like my 4-year-old nephew, for example, and how he can't. It's funny because screens actually do a great job of capturing his attention, but people talking with him and talking about his emotions and feelings through therapy. This is not an ad for virtual therapy, even though it does feel like one, because I'm definitely a fan of it. But yeah, it's like interesting to see that you're doing that work. I mean, obviously, at least from what we've talked about, doesn't sound like that type of work was something you were interested in before it kind of showed up for you. But is there anything you've kind of like learned to appreciate about doing that type of work, since actually starting to do it? Or has that shaped like how you want to spend your time going forward?
So on the spending my time going forward, I'm not really a career guy.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really view it as like a 20-year journey. I'm on like a bunch of 4-year projects in many, like that's just the way I sort of think about things. I would get bored too soon. As for, doing something that's outside of myself in a way, I sometimes view the Big Brother experience as extremely selfish. And I've said this before because I feel bad because I have a fiance who I love very much. I left her for 3 months. I left everything and I didn't tell it. And, I didn't tell anybody. I just escaped from the world and I went on the show and lived out a dream and said, screw you to everybody around. So to have a moment where I'm trying to help do something. And I don't know. It feels okay. Like and maybe that's just the way I rationalize it. I think with all work, there are going to be moments that are tough. And if you have a why behind it, then it's a lot easier to do, to like, let's call it just filling out that Excel sheet. If you know
Mhm.
why you're doing that, that work becomes a lot easier to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, like even hearing you describe that experience as a selfish one in retrospect. And I mean, maybe hindsight is 2020. But because I guess when you're able to win and then you're able to kind of like, donate money to certain things, and when you're able to kind of figure out how you use that to maybe pay off the debts that you caused by just disappearing from the world, that's a whole other thing. But I don't know. I think it's interesting that you think of it. Well, maybe it is a selfish thing, but do you view that as like a negative type of selfish in retrospect, or do you have guilt associated with having that experience? I'm like so interested in just hearing that.
Yeah.
I don't know that come up.
So if you're bringing home $100,000, it's not that selfish
Right.
anymore. I think it was something that I needed. I was at a point in my life where I wrote down what I wanted to do in the year, and one of those things was go on a grand adventure,
Mm-hmm.
and that was it for me. And I think I just needed to do that for myself. It was something I felt but I do still think it was selfish. And something that we don't talk about a lot is, what is it like for the people back home when folks go on these shows? And
Yeah.
a lot of the time it's not that easy. And I was lucky that Jillian, my fiance, she had an amazing time. Like, she really enjoyed the experience, but also like really nice of her to,
Yeah.
take care of everything. Like, that's the stuff that I'm so thankful for. So it depends on your situation. For me, I felt it was a little bit selfish, but I also felt like it was something I needed to do.
I was gonna say, like, sometimes, and I guess this depends on the person. I'm careful about saying this just because I know some people definitely need to be less selfish in terms of their priorities, and some people need to be more selfish in terms of their priorities. But it, I think sometimes it's really easy for us. And now I'm just going through like the list of things in my head where I'm like, trade-offs. Like I mentioned to you before this, like my January was 16 days of traveling, not personal travel, but like work travel. And I think they're only 31 days. So that means most of the days I was busy doing that. And in one sense, that feels selfish because it's like I'm doing what I want to do. And then another sense, it's like, well, but I'm also contributing some good and hopefully a lot of good in terms of what I'm doing. And so I don't know. I think like something that I hope that you have more and more over time is like, by being selfish, you're able to kind of be your best self, maybe, is one thing. And I don't even mean in the context of Big Brother Canada, but I just mean like, there's always the what if in life, and that's a strange thing to navigate and to think about. Like, what if you said, oh, I'm going to stay here and be present? Then I'd imagine life would be different, but I don't know. Curious of your thoughts on that.
I'm very interested in decision making, as you can see. But for me, one of the ways that I make a lot of decisions, one of the ways that I, got started on my current project, or said, yeah, I'm going to do this Big Brother Canada thing, is these things scare me. And when something really scares me, it tends to be something I want to run towards. And usually that's a good idea. It gets you burned sometimes. But I think when things are terrifying, it's often an indicator that they're worth it, and that those are things that will force you to grow, that those are things that will put you out of your comfort zone. Going into this podcast, I told you, I said at the beginning, I was nervous. I'm still nervous. Like, we're in a vulnerable place here, but you know what? I'm having a great time, Matt.
Yeah. What are your greatest fears?
I'm an achievement striver. Like, I'm always like trying to beat myself. I worry about early death. That will stop me from getting everything I want to get done in my life.
I was gonna say that was totally. I'm glad you genuinely answered that question.
Oh, was
too,
that?
because, well, I mean, I don't know. I just like to expose your biggest fear. But it's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember looking at your questionnaire for you're consistent. At least early death was your biggest fear. I wish I had a bell like Rob's, like bing, yeah, that's the right answer. But I guess I do wonder, maybe to actually like break the early death is also, oof. Pivoting to talking about early death, by the way, is like a very heavy conversation, but I want to touch on that because that's also a fear of mine. I I, I, I want to give you the space to talk about that though, and finish your thought. Like, is there anything in particular? I feel bad like asking about like this deep emotional space, but I guess that's
This is the
kind of what
space to
happened.
do it.
I mean, and the thing too is like I'm willing to go there too and expose but yeah, like I'm curious of like if you even know where that comes from. I'll say for me personally, like my thing about early death, I'm someone with like serious like deathly food allergies. I've been in the hospital like at that moment of like, and but even before being in the hospital, I've been the moment like, will I make it? Will I live? So that's actually this little soundbite in the conversation definitely is something that is a lot heavier than I think people might realize. But yeah, I'm curious for you, like, where does that come from? Not that I was I wasn't fully ready to dive into that, but I'm ready to.
No, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's a scary position to be
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like I just have a lot I want to do in the
Yeah.
next, let's call it 50 years if I'm so
70
lucky.
years.
70 years if I'm so
Yeah.
lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, 50 would be a win. If I get to 79, 80, I'd be quite happy. But
It's
anyway, that's a little bit morbid.
negotiation. We're
Yeah.
doing a negotiation here. You have to put out the higher number first, and then
Okay.
we'll work our way down.
Give me 100 more. No, but
Yeah.
I think I have a lot I want to do. And I
Yeah.
think a part of that is healthy and a part is unhealthy. The part that's healthy is the achievement striving, the working hard. Like when I'm working on something, I really, really give it my all. And then a part of it is also that's unhealthy is the so focused on whatever, the goal might be at the time, that it's also good to take in like what's happening now and appreciate every day. And if I can find a balance of those, appreciating each moment and also continue working hard towards these goals, then should be a pretty damn good 50 to 100 years.
I feel like what you talked about, like if I could find that balance and figure out how to walk that tightrope, is like such a particular balance. But again, from my perspective, like outside of you looking in, like, and maybe this, I understand that like Big Brother Canada is like a slice of your life, who you are. But I think the thing that is really cool when you think about walking that balance or doing something that feels improbable or unlikely is like there's this very visible, well-known example that people have where like you've been able to do something where it's like, if I could only figure out how to balance these like this dynamic, I could do it. But you've been able to do it. So I mean, I don't know if, do you find reassurance in like the fact that you were able to do this thing that even you weren't sure that you could do? Because if not, I'm trying to give you that reassurance.
Thank you. I believe that validation needs to come from within.
Yeah.
And so I had to do a lot of like work before I did that to be like, if I win or if I'm out first, I need to be okay with myself. I planned on winning. I planned on going in and doing it, and I did, which is great. And yes, that a part of that is validating, but there isn't like I don't think you can base any kind of self-worth on how you do on a competitive reality show. I know there is that thing, and yeah, like I'll talk my trash, and I'm happy to do that, and I'll analyze and whatever, and yeah, I'm a good player, but it's like that's not my defining it's amazing. It's the best thing in the world, but there is a
Yeah.
balance, because if that is, it could all be taken away. Like
Yeah.
you, the people who love you on the internet could hate you the next minute. So I think you need to find it within. So the long answer is, it's like maybe the best thing to ever happen to me, but also
Mhm.
I have a forceful rule on myself that the validation needs to come from somewhere way deeper.
Yeah, 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 and I love that, and I think that that's something that it's funny because I a couple of times in this conversation already, I think back to the first Pod Friends episode, which was with Taryn Armstrong, and we talked about this, and maybe he kind of set the tone for me talking about feedback and the relationship that people have with it. Um, or maybe it's just the fact that all of us in life deal with feedback, whether that's social media or friends and family and what other people think around us. But that's actually something that comes to my mind a lot. And something I find that personally, like I struggle with, which is how do I balance the self-assuredness? And I have become a very, I don't want to oversell it, but looking to myself for that assurance, kind of like what you're saying, as opposed to looking to other people is something that I've embraced. And I think is important. And I love to see that in you too, because so often in life, oh my god, I was just having this conversation the other day, but like we hinge our success on things that other people decide. So it's like, oh, I want to win a competition reality show where people vote for me. Well, you have to, that's like, not depending on the show, but like 9 other people need to
Yeah.
vote for you, or how many, the majority of people who are not you need to decide that they want to choose you to do a thing. And it's really tough because I feel like I've met a lot of people lately outside of the context of like this world who struggle with like, oh, I got rejection from that person or they won't hire me to that job. And I'm like, you can't hinge your success on like what other people decide or if people think you're worthwhile. So I don't know. Do you have advice on that for people on how to like process just managing like the validation and the addictiveness of it, with like just realizing that it actually, you know, might not be the greatest thing to constantly listen to.
I actually do, and this might be a little bit
Yeah,
of rambling, but the first thing
I
is
love it.
that we often, when people behave a certain way, especially ourselves, we often ascribe that to a rule versus a moment. So let's say I trip and fall. Instead of
Mm-hmm.
being like, I'm a clumsy person, that's a rule. That's about me. That's not changeable. It's the exam thing from earlier with Larry. It's
Mm-hmm.
in this moment I tripped and fell. Maybe my balance wasn't good. Maybe just in that moment I was clumsy. I think we do that to ourselves. We screw something up and we're like, oh, I'm so stupid. But if
Mm-hmm.
we can take that moment and change the behavior, that's like that growth mindset thing, right? So you make a mistake and you learn from it and you course correct and go from there. The other thing is, I don't think it's the worst thing to get feedback from other people, but I do
Right.
think that when you're getting feedback or advice from people, you should be careful about who those people are. So, one,
Mm-hmm.
listen to yourself, listen to your gut, because only you know where you are, where you're coming from, everything about your past and that kind of stuff. But let's say I'll use the work example that you use. Let's
Yeah.
say somebody's applying for a job. Um, a great mentor in that case is someone who has that job or someone who's one level above that. If you're asking
Mm-hmm.
someone who's not involved, does any experience about this job you're applying to and what went wrong, maybe they're the wrong person. So being more
Mm-hmm.
selective about the people you take advice from is important too. So it's making sure that you have the growth mindset, any screw ups or whatever you're making are not massive failures or overarching themes about your life or who you are. It's things you can grow from. And two is just making sure that if you are getting from feedback from people, it's the right people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's pretty simple advice, but also the thing that I appreciate. Well, there's the thing that I appreciate. I was going to go in that direction, but I guess something else that just talked about that I see in people, unfortunately, is that, at times there's really great advice that we could hear. Like that to me sounds like really great advice. And it can be hard to like take it seriously or to put it into practice or to apply someone else's advice to your life. But I think even that advice of just being protective of who you're looking to for that feedback, or who you think who's about feedback you value, essentially, is really important. And we talk about that all the time on Pod Friends in terms of podcasters and others, but like you kind of need to do that, especially in a world where it's really easy for someone with like, I don't even know if Twitter still has the egg thing going on in terms of like but I'll call it like the eggs on Twitter, random anonymous people / actually, I think in the world of like Big Brother and reality shows, it's like, oh, you have a profile picture of this player and you are not this player. But like, it's so easy to take that feedback, and it's weird because in my context, it's like, oh, like feedback on like podcasts. It's easy to take the good and the bad, but I think just knowing who to look to is so important. And I'm not going to start shouting out people who I look to for great feedback on podcasts, but you could imagine it's a lot of people who I've actually podcasted with and who I'm sure you've listened to before.
I've asked them for that feedback too.
And they get the great. I know I'm really struggling not to name names, but yeah, great. It's great having like people like that who you could trust and look to, and obviously, I'll say as an overarching theme, Taryn Armstrong, great person to ask for feedback on anything in your life, in your time on TV, in your time off TV. I don't know, just saying. But I want to ask. I want to go back to something that you were saying. You're talking about kind of like just where you want to go in life. And this kind of ties in a little bit to like the fear of death thing. But I have a very vague, broad question for you, which is, is there a big question, or are there any big questions that you feel like you're navigating or like wrestling with at this point where you are on the journey? Sometimes we have the answers, but also a lot of the time it's like, yeah, I'm still figuring this one out at this point.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm at a point in my life where I kind of have an idea, but who knows, of what the next year or two or so look like. I mean, I have goals. I think in the like, what am I struggling with? It's more like, what am I working on? Like, each day I'm trying to be less of an asshole. So that's one.
Got it.
I'm trying to be healthier. I'm trying to be a better partner. I'm trying to be better at my job. I'm just trying to be better at all those kind of basic things, a better son, a better brother. And I know that's sort of this cheesy generic answer, but those things are not easy. Like, it is not easy to wake up every day and bring your best self while also trying to, feel those initial emotions and be more expressive and a better listener. So I'm just waking up and just trying to be better. You know what? You know what I struggle with, Matt?
Give it to me.
The creative stuff. I don't always have a creative outlet, and there is a very creative part of me that actually the BB Can experience was amazing for satiating, because it's just that you just live in a box and you just do whatever you want every day, basically, while you're there. But that is one thing that I am struggling with. How do I express myself creatively?
Yeah. That's a big question. And it's like, it's interesting because I appreciate the piece of that ties in with Big Brother Canada, because I think that there's something really amazing to the idea, and not necessarily the most practical thing, but to the idea of being in a box, away from the distractions, away from everything else that could come up. Obviously, there are a lot of reasons why it doesn't necessarily work for people. There are people who need you outside of that box / other things you need to be doing. But it's interesting to hear about that creative aspect, and it's cool to know that you want to nurture that, because I think that's kind of where anything, like any kind of growth starts. Like something that you kind of mentioned, like downplaying how you want to be a better partner, how you want to be a better son, how you want to be better in all of these different ways, work out more, take care of your health more, is like I could ask someone else the same question and their answers might be more oriented to, I want to make more money. I want to just things that, other people have different priorities. And I want to like appreciate that. I don't know, in my humble opinion, like, I think that those are pretty awesome priorities, like to be better and to try to do better and to even like nurture something in yourself that could lead to better things, not only for yourself but for other people, is kind of cool. But I don't really know. It's funny because I always feel like I have a weird relationship with the idea of creativity, where so many of us think of ourselves as like, I'm creative, I'm not creative. And I think I divorced myself from that idea of labeling myself as a bunch of different things, probably, but definitely as creative or not creative, because it's all so subjective. Are there certain things creatively that you want to do more specifically? Like, is there anything that comes to mind?
It's funny you say that, because I remember I was talking to someone who's a musician, and
Yeah.
I was telling him a story that someone else told me about another musician. The story was that this person was living with them, and they woke up one day, and this guy, who's the lead singer in a successful band, was just lying on the porch with his shirt off, just playing guitar.
Uh-huh.
And the guy said, like, I looked at him and I was like, that's creativity. I'll never have that. The musician I was having dinner with at the time said, no, that's actually not. That's just how that guy does it. That's not how it works for everyone. And I thought that was really interesting, and a really interesting response. That's like two stories in one. Because I'm not like the kind of person who wakes up every day. Would you hear about some creative people and they're like, I'm using music, but I'm not a musician. I need to write songs. Like, I need to express it that way. For me, it's more of like a deeper long-term thing. Like, I enjoy creating things. So I have lots of little hobby projects, like writing like little screenplays, or like a newsletter, or even something as simple as this year I came into, not a lot, just a few social media followers, like a few thousand.
Just a few.
Well, relatively relative to, it's all whatever.
Everything's relative.
Yeah, I've no idea how to express myself like properly on those platforms. But the things like quietly writing on my own, I actually find, not for like any kind of business or anything, but I find it really enriching to the soul, because you take your thoughts and like, part of the reason why oral cultures over the years lose so much is because they're oral cultures, right? People are speaking to each other generation after generation. But when we start writing stuff down, you have to form your thoughts in solidified, somewhat linear ways. So for me, when I'm writing, that's creatively fulfilling.
Yeah, it's like interesting to hear, though, like writing is kind of what I don't know, that's a place where that resonates. And it's funny to me thinking about it. I know I talked earlier about almost being a creative writing minor, but I used to do so much more writing. Like, it used to be a lot of poetry writing in particular, especially to like capture thoughts and feelings and emotions that I had. And I think part of it, and this, I'll give a plug for my conversation with Stephen Fishback on Podfriends, because we were talking a lot about this. But part of it is just being out of practice for me in terms of the writing thing. And I think especially as I became more oriented toward like podcasts and recording things and video, that there was something in my mind, or like just how I approached creativity and writing, that shifted, where now I struggle with it so much. So, I don't know if there's really an answer, but if anyone has any if you have any tips, actually, you know what? Let's, do you have any tips for me that might also happen to be good tips for you? But do you have any tips for like someone who's like, yeah, I figured.
I'd be like,
Yeah, that'd be amazing if you were like, well, here's what you need to do, Matt. Here are the 5 steps. I'm like, okay, great, Kevin, just
Yeah,
follow those steps.
these 5 steps to become Shakespeare. So
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, the thing I always hear is write every day
Yeah.
and just do something. I mean, again, if we want to talk about distractions, like I'll even when I'm working, I'll sometimes just put my phone in a different room just because it's
Hmm.
just helpful to do that and focus. But I think my message to myself is write every day. And by the way, what you
Yeah.
said, podcasting is also, this is a beautiful creative environment as well. Like this actually scratches the itch a lot. This is one of the best things to come out of Big Brother for me, is that I get to go on these podcasts and talk about the shows I love.
Finally.
This is amazing.
Finally.
Yeah.
No, I know you're famous. You're famous for the podcasts. I know. I don't. Was your RHAP debut an appearance on Love Know-It-Alls, or was I don't know. I know you're prolific before BB Canada time. So
I think I have a few. So during my tech research time, one of the things that I did some research on was dating apps. So I called into the Love Know-It-Alls a couple times, and then I think that would be my debut.
Yeah. So did you call in? I want to clarify, because I don't know if this has been on the record. Did you call in as Ted and then as Kevin?
I don't know. So Ted.
What do you mean you don't know? No,
I don't remember.
You're
remember
like, I'm such a prolific thinker. Well, you didn't say that, but that's. I'm just saying. I just think it's interesting. Like I want to know the truth, and I don't know if I need to go back. In fact, I did go back as part of my research and listen to you on one of the Love Know-It-Alls episodes. Good times. Shout out to Sophie Clark.
Love that. That's so funny. I'm just glad my wand off submissions never made it to air, because those hopefully they're lost.
Oh my gosh, what a revelation. This is like the headline news for somebody, ?
Yeah, let's keep those in the dark, Rob.
I'll let it go, but you're lucky that I'm not asking you to replicate those right now on the pod. I mean, if you want, do you want to perform your wand off?
I don't remember.
If you remember them from,
I think it was like, I think it was to the tune of South Park's Blame Canada, about I think it was a tribe that was doing poorly on one season.
Okay, I think with that, I think somebody might piece that together and come up with what tribe it was, what the alternate lyrics might be. Is it coming back to you?
No, I really don't remember.
Okay, good, because I wasn't expecting it. But then again, if you do ever find that file and want to release it, I'm just saying,
we'll see.
We could have another episode, like
there's probably a reason why it never actually made the air. But this is like I remember I went to the Live Know-It-Alls in Toronto in 2017 or whatever it was, and that was so cool, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of I'm gonna say a lot of people went to that, but I feel like I've heard a lot of stories that intersect with Live Know-It-Alls in Toronto. Was, as far as you know, was that the last Live Know-It-Alls in Toronto in 2017? Yeah. Wow. Yeah, so there are a lot of people, and I'm not good with the details and trivia of things, so don't ask me who. But a lot of people who've had experience going to that, I swear there have been other Pod Friends guests who were at least one, actually at least two. Stephen Fishback was there, but other people who were there. What was that experience like as part of the community in your RHAP infancy, I'll call it?
Everybody's just nice. It's just nice to be a part of a group of people that like something together. I'm really interested in people who are passionate about something, whether it's something that I'm into or not. Anytime someone's deep down a rabbit hole on a topic, I love that. And to be in a community of people that were all into competitive reality TV in the same way, like, it was just it was just awesome. Everybody was there for the same reason. It was so cool. Like, the way I often get into things is by seeing people who are into something, and I'm like, what are you? Why? Like, why? Like, why are you so deep on that? So I like fan culture.
Yeah. It's like interesting to hear you talk a little about like the obviously, notoriously, infamously, famously, one or the other. You're someone obviously who's a super fan of all this stuff, but like even just going back a little bit further, when did you discover Rob as a podcast / similar podcast communities?
So I was watching Survivor from the beginning, and I actually kind of got it. This is, I don't know why I'm embarrassed at this point, but I think I listened to one of the, like, I heard there was a guy named Kevin doing really well in Big Brother. So in Big Brother Canada 5, like, whatever. Anyway, I was like, okay, I'll tune in. I tuned into the end of the season. It was also around the time I think RHAP released like a why you should watch Big Brother as a Survivor fan. I maybe had a little bit of that stigma of like, oh no, Big Brother, Survivor is like the serious one, but they're all unserious. The first, when was Caramoan? What year was that? Not a season that people are like, what was Caramoan? I remember that fondly.
I don't know if anyone's watching the video. Well, I know there are people watching the video version, but my eyes just glazed over at the Survivor tribute. I want to say, well, I looked it up. I was gonna say 2012, and it was 2012 that it was filmed, and yep, I think it was released in 2012. Let's call it that. Maybe 2013.
So I guess I knew who Rob was and maybe saw online on a podcast or something. And whether it was that year or slightly after, there was a long conversation with Cochran that I can remember listening to, who won that season. Spoiler. It's 2023.
10 years later.
I can remember listening to that and thinking it was really cool that that you can go a level deeper, because by that point I'd survived. Survivor's a global phenomenon for the first like couple seasons, and then it kind of cooled off in terms of like the mainstream what this thing is, and I stayed the whole way. And so to discover a little community of people was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like happy 10-year anniversary on the premiere of Caramoan, because apparently Caramoan premiered. I hate saying anything that's too specific because someone might correct me when I'm wrong, but I think I just read February 13th, 2013 cool. Is when it came out. So happy anniversary to you for Caramoan. A shout out to Cochran. Shout out to who else should we shout out from that season? Dawn.
Brenda.
Shout out to Dawn. I'll never forgive Brenda. Come on. Shout out to Dawn. Andrea, all the people. Now this is just a trivia. Trivia contest. We're both gonna lose. No, yeah, it's a struggle. I will say there is. Caramoan has come up on a different episode of Pod Friends when somebody quizzed me on what seasons happened when and who was on what. I'm never good at that stuff, but hey, like I think it's cool that we could be in this community of people who are so like in the weeds. I think it's cool that we could be in a community where there's actually interest in like a 5+ hour podcast from you talking about your experience on these shows. I want to ask, kind of like fast forwarding to that. What did it feel like to hold the RHAP record of 5+ hours? I believe 5 hours 23 minutes is what the record's telling me. But what did it feel like to hold that?
I believe we've been beaten over and over.
I think you were beaten within like 2 weeks.
Marianne just saw that and she's like, I'm gonna destroy this.
She did.
It was, I've never said this out loud, but it was like very much for me a helpful archive of that moment in time. And like I said earlier, my opinion, my perception of things has changed. I'm sure it will continue to change, and I'll continue to learn and grow from the experience, because it is a very intense experience. But those 5 whatever hours were at Taryn, like, just, let me tell my story as I saw it, or at least as I saw it in that time. I'd already watched the season and listened to a few podcasts, but it was really cool to be able to sort of recap it. It was almost like a stream of consciousness diary room session in a way. I was like the Virginia Woolf of RHAP.
For that
Yeah.
1 to 2 weeks until, well, really it was like by the end of the month, Marianne definitely changed the game forever. And then her record was broken, and it's been broken multiple times since. So I don't know if anyone's keeping track of the record or not. But
who has it now? Taylor?
I don't honestly. Taylor might have. Yeah, I think Taylor has it at this point.
Cool.
Because like I know it's in the 6-hour mark somewhere, which
Wild.
I think it'll one day. Pod Friends will do it. We'll go there. We won't go to the 6-hour mark today, but I'm just letting you know and putting it out there for a future guest. If anyone wants to sit here for 7 hours, we could do it. We can make it happen.
Matt, you should make your attempt. I mean, why didn't you do it with Marianne?
If you can't beat them, like, no, I don't think I had it in me. That's it. I need to like really wake up, like maybe wake up early too, like maybe at like 6 a.m.
Yeah, you got to get started
and just fresh without doing anything in the day. Like I'm gonna make my coffee during the podcast. I'll have probably 3 cups of coffee to make it through the 7 hours. But I think we'll do it one day. I don't know who. Maybe. I don't know. You could give me suggestions after this too, if there's anyone who's gonna hang in there for 7 hours. I don't think Marianne had. I'm gonna say this, and if this makes it back to Marianne, that's okay. I don't think Marianne would have had the 7 hours of Pod Friends in her, because she's very efficient with.
She's very efficient.
Like she needs, if she like really wanted to stretch it out, she could have, and I appreciate that for Marianne.
So, let me ask you this, Matt.
Yes,
what's interesting again, like let me continue to love on Pod Friends. There we go. One of the things that's interesting to me is that you do get a big variety of conversations here. Mm-hmm. You get like the amazing, like meaningful Mike Bloom episode. You get the I thought the Sasha was a cool one. Like, as I'm somebody who's really curious about people.
Yeah.
Like what have you learned from doing this with the interesting variety of people and wide variety of topics you've covered?
That's a great question. And it's, you know what, there's a lot that I kind of, so there's like Pod Friends, and they're the interviews I've done with people for Pod Friends, but even that started a year ago. Going back to 2017, like I just started interviewing people then, change makers in different ways who are working in advocacy work or different areas. And, and professionally, I also interview people. And I think the thing that maybe you didn't ask for one thing. So then just among the things that I've learned, like one is that we're often not asked we're often not asked good questions, or like questions that allow us to like fully show up. So it's like, going through the hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of like your story to bring it back to you when it comes to Big Brother Canada, but even Exit Press, I find myself like hitting my head against the wall. Same goes for Marianne. Same goes for like Stephen Fishback and others, where it's like, there's so much more. There's always so much more to dive into with people. And I think the thing I appreciate most, and I'll talk about it on the podcast a lot, but there are episodes like the Mike Bloom episode, which like, that is like a whole other, that even for me was just kind of Mike taking me on the journey, and we were on a journey having a conversation and just got swept up in that. And it's really powerful, and I'll always be so proud of that. But there are also the conversations that people won't listen to as much. And I think the thing I realize, and I just want more people to like see it, is like, whether it's someone who you know and you love, or it's someone who you're like, who the F is that? Like, there's always something valuable for you to learn from people, which like, I feel like you, as someone who's like such a listener, recognizes that like I might think I know what's going to come out of this person's mouth, but if I listen, then I might hear something that I'm not expecting. But a lot of us don't listen, which is kind of the thing that I've realized. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to like use this as an excuse to listen, because like so many of these conversations, including this one for us, it's including my episode last week with Jessica Leese. That was our first time literally having a conversation. And I don't know. I just wish more people were fans of conversations, but also I'm glad they're not, because then there'd be like 10 other pod friends. Is yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is there anything anything else? I don't know. Is there an answer that you expected, or is there anything else that maybe to even throw it out to you, like anything else that you find that you gain from conversation and listening to people?
Well, first, let me say, appreciate you giving, your guests the space to speak, because it's not easy to get people to talk, and it's not easy to create a space where it's like I think part of my nerves coming into this were also, I know I'm gonna, like, there's no when I'm on stage, like there's something there, like I'm putting out energy, and that's me, but this is also me, and taking it down here. So for me, when I'm listening to people, whether it be on here or otherwise, I think it is a way, the same thing as like the books. It's not like I'm not reading the person, but it's like a way to learn about the world, because different people can have completely different perceptions and points of view and experiences that shape the way they view things. That's going to be totally different from how you see the world. And so I think we become richer as people, enriched as people, when we can hear those different stories and understand them and learn from them. And also selfishly, when I then go and listen to these podcasters, I understand a little bit about more about where they're coming from. So it gives me a little more context for the podcast.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll say, even just in the context of RHAP, like one reason that, and I'm so thankful not to be super self-referential, and I think Mike Bloom corrected me a few weeks ago that this is not the most self-referential podcast on RHAP, as Robin and Keith Anita podcast definitely is. But as one of them, I think it's okay to talk about the fact that, like, I just really wanted to get to know people in RHAP more. Like pod friends, it's definitely not about interviewing my friends who I've formed through podcasting. It's about like really getting to know people and like diving in, because we just talk so much about the shows, and I'm like, who is Kevin beyond the shows out? And obviously, like with you, with Evie, with Marianne, with Stephen Fishback, with T-Bird, with all these people who've been on these shows, Wendell, there is definitely an overlap between the shows and your life, but it's like that's only a sliver. And the thing that I think is really cool about talking with you now about this is like, well, one, not only that you've listened to Pod Friends, but also like your Pod Friends episode in a year from now, or even just a conversation that we have like at a future point, will be different, because it is still so fresh. Like the evolution continues. And I don't know, this is like interesting to talk about. But I guess like, I'm curious about your reactions to that. But just to stop in on that.
It's a moment in time. And I had a weird, I don't know, the last couple of years have been weird for me, and sort of being like, oh, I'm actually an adult. And I know I'm probably too old for that. But like the sort of realization of those things, where I've been an adult for many years, it's kind of like this growing into this idea that where you are at one moment, what am I even saying? I think what you said captures it, is that this is one moment in time, one point of view. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it. Like your conversation with someone you don't see them for a year or for 2 years. That who knows what's going to be on the other end when you reconnect. That's
cool. But I think the other thing that's really cool, and the thing that I'm thankful for with these conversations, and people keep saying to me, they're like, Matt, you need to do a Pod Friends where someone interviews you. And I'm like, okay, we'll get there at some point, whatever. But the thing that I think is really interesting is like, I don't know, just knowing that through conversations, like we could spend 5 hours with some people, or any one person could spend 5 hours with someone and not even truly get to know them. Whether or not, and I'm not even talking about, it's funny, 5 hours is what I came up with, because I wasn't even talking about like the exit interviews, but there's that. And sometimes conversations just don't get that deep, where you could be sitting in a room next to someone and only know like these surface level things about them versus diving in deeper. Like I'm very thankful for the kind of bonds that come up in a lot of this, even with us in this conversation. Like listening back, I'm sure there's a lot that'll jump out in terms of the just like, wow, okay, that's something that like even in a year from now, if we were talking like, oh man, like Kev and I have that deeper connection on XYZ thing. And I think that that's the cool thing. And I hope that people could really like appreciate these conversations and the voice, like what people share in their stories, because sometimes it's really understated, but also like a lot of people share some like deep shit in Pod Friends, and I'm always thankful for the fact that they're willing to share that with me, and of course like anyone who's listening by extension. So, and I'm also thankful for anyone who listens, and the fact that you've listened to Pod Friends and that anyone's hearing the sound of my voice right now as we get super talking about Pod Friends, which is a very uncomfortable thing for me to talk about, things that make us uncomfortable and nervousness. Right? Like I, again, if anyone wants to hear me talking about Pod Friends, I'm thankful for you. But we're here. And I do feel the urge, Kevin, to like switch it back to questions about you, but I also don't want to do that uncomfortable thing of just like steering away from what you brought up. So I don't know what to do.
Well, if I put you into an uncomfortable position, I'm sorry about that, but it's also
it's great.
Like, I think everything you've just said, for me at least, is incredibly interesting, and like I'm here, I'm part of this conversation, but also I'm fascinated by what you're sort of talking about, because you are in a cool position where you've had these conversations, and I think I'm on team get somebody to interview Matt at some point.
I don't even know. I was gonna say I don't even know. It'll happen. Well, it'll happen at some point. It'll happen. And there's a list of people. I don't know. You could sign up for the list of people to do that interview. I have a few people who are already in mind. But anyway, we'll get there. To get back on track of the topic of the conversation, which is you, Kevin.
It's me?
Kevin Ted Jacobs.
Okay.
I want to ask kind of a question. Of a question. I guess it is a question. But it's really about, there's so much else we could talk about, but I want to dive more into like your story overall. And it's a question that you've heard me ask people. I would love to know, if your life were a book or documentary, Kevin, what would the title be and why? See, that's my out of getting out of a place of like, just talk about myself, to then making it completely about you again.
Good work.
Thank you.
So clunky. I knew this question was coming. I didn't plan for it, but I'm going to go with reading between the lines.
Okay.
And here's why.
Yeah.
Throughout this conversation, we've talked about how English literature was very interesting for me. That was where that came up, reading between the lines. But I think a lot of life and a lot of topics we've covered is less about what is in that moment or what the facts of the moment are. And it's more about what you make out of it, how you interpret a situation, how you listen to someone, how you understand them, how you engage with a tough situation. And those are things that are not necessarily like written there, but it's what happens between. So if we're talking about, my life, I think for me, a lot of it is taking these moments and really trying to make the most out of them for good or bad, whether it's like, as a partner to Jillian, or as, the like having fun every day in the Big Brother Canada house, or even now, like working on this project I'm working on, just trying to take these moments and sort of get every morsel of life out of them. Like that's what I'm just after, a kind of appreciation. And I think that takes reading between the lines, because on the surface, something like work could just look like, hey, I'm sitting in this room and I work on things every day for however many hours. That could look really boring. But
Yeah.
if you can read between the lines,
Dun, dun,
Matt, if you can
dun.
read between the lines, then you can find more meaning in those little moments and in the big ones too.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I love that. And you know what? We've kind of bounced between Big Brother Canada, or that experience coming up. But you know what? A thing that I really appreciate about let's call it a Big Brother or a game, and we kind of talked about this idea of being like sequestered from the world or in a box and focused on something. But one thing I really love about that environment is that like you're almost incentivized to read between the lines, or that's what you should aim. That is what you should do. Like focusing on things, counting the number of days, looking for details that come up, because you might be asked about. Like there's a lot that comes up, and I don't know. I think that like part of what I wish for myself, but also other people, is like, I mean, yes, it's good to not have to be hyper vigilant all the time. It's probably good for your health, but also like it's yeah, it's nice to be really present and taking things in at times too, and reading between the lines is part of that, definitely. Yeah. So I have to ask though, if you had someone write I don't ask this ever if often, but if you had someone write the foreword for that book, Reading Between the Lines, who would it be? And why, I guess, is always the embedded question there. See, now I put you on the spot to make a tough decision. Or not.
I think it would be my mommy.
Yeah, mommy.
She's
Shout out to mom.
shout out to Tanya, but really it's Tanya, because that's how it's actually pronounced. But anyway, it's the Canadian way is Tanya. Anyway, so
Yeah.
she's like very, very emotionally intelligent, and I think she's somebody who's really good at sort of reading between the lines. But yeah, she's someone who tends to have a good understanding of things over time, and she's a good writer as well. So she's gonna write the foreword to this book.
I'll have to remind someone to maybe at the beginning. You know what? I'm not going to ask anyone to play the reading between the lines drinking game, but if you are at this point in the podcast and you do decide to listen again, now you know that you could play that game. Shout out to your mom. Shout out to
How do you play
Jillian.
that game?
We didn't give a shout to Jillian earlier.
Shout out to Jillian. What is the reading between the lines drinking game?
I just made it up. It's every time that we say reading between the lines.
Oh,
I know.
I see. Reading between the lines. Okay.
You should have been reading between the lines. Kevin, anything else that you were while we're here? Anything else that you want to talk about? Anything else you want to dive into?
I think we're good. I mean, every person has tons and tons of layers, and I enjoyed talking about a few of mine. So thank you for giving that space. This is a very different kind of podcast. I came in with a nervous but calm demeanor for today. This is a level that I didn't feel like the pressure to entertain, which is there some, which and you know what, like I don't know, but anyway,
yeah. I mean, I will say though also, and I'm going to give you, speaking of words, I do want to give you the chance for some I don't want to call them final words because that could seem a little morbid, but closing words for the listeners in a second. But just also want to say, like, yeah, there's a time, and I think that it's easy to, like, I always find I'm caught off guard by these conversations at times, and I enter nervous because I'm like, no one needs to feel the pressure to entertain. Some of us do feel that naturally, and then it's cool and we could talk about why we feel that naturally. And it's also nice to get out of that pressure to entertain. But Kevin, I would love if you could entertain me with some closing words for the podcast listeners.
We talked a lot about decision making and how I've made decisions in my life, or about getting feedback from people, or about our fears. I will say to the podcast listeners, no one knows what's best for you except for you. So my
Mm.
message right now is listen to yourself, trust yourself, because your gut is usually right.
Thank you, 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 everyone, for listening to this episode of Pod Friends. I love talking with Kevin, and I love these conversations, especially because, like last week's with Jessica Leese, like this week's with Kevin, this is my very first time talking with Kevin and getting to know him and diving in and going beyond the surface of what people think they know, and diving into so much more that I had no idea about, diving into so much more that I think really bonds Kevin and I a lot. And, I don't want to hurt Kevin's reputation at all, but I will say that whenever I see him in person, because it will happen, I'm sure, at some point, one way or the other, the biggest hug for him. And Kevin, if you're listening, so thankful for you. You're probably listening because you're a Pod Friends listener, and I hope that you, Kevin, and you, the listeners, are subscribed to the podcast. Rob has a website.com/podfriendsfeed. And again, hit those 5 stars, leave a review. I love to hear from you. It really does mean a lot. It keeps not only the lights on from a logistical perspective, but also keeps me coming back for more and doing this and having these amazing conversations that I love to have. And I hope that you're enjoying as well, because you made it to the end of the pod. So thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you. And if you're not already following me on social media, follow me at MattScottGW on social, follow at Hey Pod Friends. And, feel free to shoot me a DM, feel free to shoot me a tweet. Let me know that you got to this point. I love to hear from you all. And really, I do have a lot of love for you. This world isn't easy, and I appreciate that you all are some of the handful of people taking out the time to listen and to be a pod friend. So you could hear me here. You could hear me also on the Wrestling RHAP with the one and only Mari Forth at Mari Talks Too Much, 2, like the number 2. Mari's phenomenal. She covers Big Brother Canada, Big Brother in general, lots of shows. She has a great podcast with the one and only Sarah Carradine called Crime Scene, so follow her. And until next time, thank you. Yes, you. Thank you. You. Actually, you know what? Literally, if you are able to, reach back and just pat yourself on the back. I don't know if you could hear that, but I'm patting myself on the back for you, and I hope that you are too. Thank you for being a pod friend. Love you guys. Take care of yourselves.